So, great part of history is William Stanley Jevons. Now, I had not, hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I had not heard about him until quite recently, which is actually kind of interesting because it relates to an area that I've actually found interesting for quite a while in terms of the Luddite fallacies. I think that the work he was doing is complementary to the concept of the Luddite fallacy. And just as a quick reminder, I've mentioned it a few times before. The Luddite fallacy is the notion that technology doesn't just destroy jobs, because it certainly does destroy jobs. It doesn't just destroy jobs; it also creates jobs, and therefore the Luddite fallacy, the Luddite fallacy essentially is the idea that the jobs will be destroyed by technology and there'll be mass unemployment. The argument is, of course, and it's held true for about 250 years now, that because jobs will also be created, because this is a fallacy, this will not lead to mass unemployment. And of course, why we don't have mass unemployment, despite the fact that we have many labour-saving technologies, has been something of great interest to economists for quite a long time. There was a recent proposal that it relates to the complexity of society, and I actually think it's quite a satisfying answer. I'm not saying I necessarily believe it, but I think it's probably got some. I think that's something that they probably should look at seriously. Anyway, so Jevons, 1835 to 1882. So the poor gentleman didn't live very long. He was an economist and a mathematician, and he was one of several men who started to put economics on a more rigorous mathematical footing. So he originally studied natural history, which is what we would call science today. And he was, remember talking here, 19th century. He was interested in biology and chemistry in a few different areas. Anyway, apparently I think his family was fairly well off, but they ran into some financial problems. His father's business went bankrupt, and he actually moved to Australia for 5 years and worked as an assayer at the Mint in Sydney. And an assayer in this role is responsible for making sure essentially that the coins have the right proportion of nickel and copper and so forth. Obviously, if you got the proportions wrong, the coins might be worth more than the actual face value, and so it'd be quite serious. So it was an important job that he was doing there, but I don't think he particularly liked it from the sounds of it. Anyway, he only did it for 5 years. Then he returned to the UK, and that's when he really started to focus on economics and mathematics. And as I said, he made significant contributions and yeah, put it on a more rigorous mathematical footing. But he particularly looked at something called the coal problem or the coal paradox. And that was something that had been noticed in the UK in the 19th century, that they were being more efficient with the use of coal, and that it was widely thought that this would result in coal consumption going down. But it didn't. It went up.
Right.
And yeah, and he ended up calling this. Well, he ended up developing something called the Jevons paradox, and that's what I think is complementary to the Luddite fallacy. So essentially, what it's saying is, in many cases, the easier and cheaper it is to use something, the
Mm.
more it will be used.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting. Probably in the modern era, that seems fairly intuitive to us. But for a long time, it wasn't something. For a long time, everyone assumed that wouldn't be the case. They assumed if you made something cheap, made something more efficient, not necessarily cheaper, but more efficient, it would be used less because you would need less of it. But what effectively ends up happening? New uses are found, older uses start to happen at greater scale, and we now see this all over the place. He of course noticed this in coal consumption in the UK, but roads are a classic example. And what's interesting about this though is governments, even up until recently, when they're doing planning on roads and so forth, they're still assuming if you add roads, congestion will reduce,
Right.
right? But
Hmm.
it's not true. Jevons paradox shows that it's not true. And roads are a classic example of this. So if you build more roads, congestion can actually go up
Hmm.
because now
Right.
more people are driving. Especially when you consider that
Yeah.
if you build more roads, you've done that perhaps at the expense of public transport or something like that. So
Right.
anyway, it's something that apparently governments have, yeah, still really sort of not really on with board with this idea, which is terrible.
Hmm. Right.
But of course, we see it with new complete computer networks as well, where
Oh yeah.
look at. I mean, I guess if this is what I'm getting at, to us, it's perhaps almost obvious now because
Hmm.
anybody who's seen the computer revolution of the last 30 years realizes that the more networking capacity you pump at the world, the more people use networks, and the more things people find to use networks for.
Right.
So, and this is all Jevons paradox. coming out. And as I said, I think this is fairly complementary to the notion of the Luddite fallacy. So I do think it is good that this is perhaps something that is more evident now. But governments continue to build roads in the hope that it will reduce congestion and ends up resulting in the opposite and so forth. So anyway, there it is.